Garden Chat for many years and has subbed in for Ed Lawrence, yes, those days, on the radio, a thrilling but scary experience. Claudette is currently the administrator for the very successful Master Gardeners of Ontario Facebook group and works with a great team of master gardeners and garden experts to provide reliable, science-based gardening advice to the public. This forum continues to grow and has just exceeded 52,000 members. She and Kathy Cavasalis are the co-founders of the Canadian Coalition for Invasive Plant Regulation, or CIPR, which aims to stop the sale of high-risk invasive plants that harm biodiversity. She loves to attract wildlife to her garden, and her most recent passion is adding larval host plants for butterflies and native plants to support specialist bees. Welcome to Claudette Sims.
Thank you very much for that. I will try and share my PowerPoint. Let's see if that works. And let me know if I am advancing. Why is it not? Do you see the title screen?
Yes, we do.
And it's advancing?
Yes, we are. Yes.
Good. Okay, perfect. Always test that because there are times where it does not, and then you're in a lot of trouble if it doesn't advance. Well, in any case, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really honored to be doing this with you in celebration of Earth Day. I can't think of a better way of celebrating Earth Day. So,
Can I interrupt for just a moment? How do I get rid of everybody on the top of the screen so I can see the full picture of what you're displaying?
usually there's a box somewhere and you can change the view. I'm not sure what it's like on WebEx, unfortunately.
Maybe layout.
It's in the upper right corner in your layout.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm in.
Okay, so we're going to get started. All right. Before we get into the presentation, I just wanted to have a full disclosure. Many of us have or have had invasive plants in their garden. I'm still struggling. This is about increasing awareness. I'm not here to shame or blame anyone for having invasive plants. It is a journey. And look at that picture of Niagara Botanical Gardens. This photo was just taken April 2024. It is just full of periwinkles. So a lot of individuals, municipalities, and gardens are struggling with this. So our journey is going to begin. I'm going to talk a little bit about background so we all are on the same page. I'm going to talk about regulations in Canada and what we see as the problem with invasive plants. And then we're going to give you our CIPR recommendations. And I'm going to finish with some action items that individuals can do. So I do work on that Master Gardener Forum with such talented people, both Master Gardener experts, and we have some not Master Gardener experts that we rely on. They are amazing. In the beginning, a few years ago, people would ask about, where should I plant this burning bush, or what should I do with this, these scilla bulbs or whatever. And we'd say, well, we recommend that you don't plant that, or we recommend that you remove this plant from the garden. And they were shocked. They would say, what do you mean this is invasive? I just got this plant. So that's really how CIPR was born. It was really an outrage from the public. They actually said on our Facebook page, what are you going to do about this? So Kathy and I did, and that's how CIPR was founded. So just so that we're all on the same page and talking about the same things, let's talk about different kinds of plants. So there are lots of names. I tend to use the names, I go for simplicity: native, non-native, and invasive. So a native plant, this is one of many definitions, is a plant that occurs naturally in a particular region or an ecosystem and has evolved, that's a key word, in concert with the other naturally occurring species. And the species can be insects, they can be birds, they can be soil microbiota, which we often forget about. An example of something that is native to many parts of Ontario is our native rose, Rosa blanda. I looked at Plants of the World online today, and it shows Rosa blanda as being native to quite a large section of Canada, and even going actually quite far north. Different websites that you use will have different native ranges. And I must emphasize that when it shows all of Ontario as being native, I would question that because, and look at how this is arranged in political boundaries. So plants don't respect political boundaries. They don't care about that. They are more interested in being in an area that has the same type of soil conditions, etc. And there are times where native plants are native to just a county or a very small region of Ontario. So Rosa blanda can be native to Ontario, but look, it's not native to BC. So it could be invasive there, or at the very least non-native. Non-native plants, as I've just said, are non-native plants that are outside their normal area of introduction. So, for instance, Rosa blanda could be non-native in BC. Rosa chinensis, which is located in a very small, if you see the green there, very small area of China, it is also introduced in many other areas, and it is an example of a non-native plant. Roses from China were then hybridized, and they have gone all over the world. An invasive plant, by contrast, well, it's the same as a non-native plant. It's outside its normal area of distribution, but the big difference is it causes harm. It can cause harm to the environment, to the economy, to society, including human health. A really good example of a rose that is invasive is Rosa multiflora. It was originally planted as a natural hedge in Canada and in Ontario, and actually North America in general. And it is often the rootstock to a rose that's not as hardy. So a new rose, a hybrid that's been developed, they will use Rosa multiflora. What happens then is that sometimes the new rose hybrid dies and the Rosa multiflora rootstock grows. And once it starts growing, it will invade areas, natural lands. I want to talk about weeds versus invasive species because a lot of people get these confused. I often ask, what do you consider to be a weed in your garden? And I get some really interesting answers. Most people will talk about weeds in their lawn, such as dandelions or creeping Charlie. But some people will mention things like Virginia creeper or native grape. Those are actually native plants. And yes, they can be weeds because weeds are basically plants that are growing where they are not wanted. So if the Virginia creeper is growing somewhere where you don't want it, you can say it's a weed for sure. And weeds can be native plants, they can be non-native, they can be invasive, they can be non-invasive. Most Canadian provinces have lists of noxious weeds. They are usually weedy species, like I just mentioned. They are often things like a Canada thistle, which is not a native plant. They are plants that harm agriculture, livestock, or workers. So in the Ontario noxious weed list, 25 plants are listed. They are mostly weedy things, but there's a native plant like poison ivy, which could hurt workers. And in the past, milkweed was often on, and still is, on a lot of provincial noxious weed lists because it was thought to harm livestock. That's been disproved. Milkweeds are still in many of the provinces. It was removed in Ontario in 2015. And we all know that milkweed is one of the hosts, any milkweed, but common milkweed is one of the hosts of the monarch butterfly. So I'm very glad that it was removed from the list. And then we have non-native versus invasive species. Most of our vegetables, fruits, and herbs are introduced from somewhere else. Many beloved perennials, like the peony that you see here, come from far away. While all of these plants might not support a lot of native biodiversity, they tend to stay put. But there is an invasive species in these photos. Can you spot it? Did you see the peppermint that's growing here or that's in this basket? This is a plant that if you do grow it in your garden because you want it maybe for your margaritas or something, or your mojitos, I guess mojitos, not margaritas, or whatever you want in one of your salads, it needs to be contained. Grow it in a container and be careful if you put the container in the ground for the winter, make sure that when you remove it, there are no bits of peppermint left because this will invade the rest of your garden. How do invasive plants arrive in Canada? Well, many of them are unintentional introductions, things that we can't do too much about. So they come in with contaminants and garden supplies. But we are concerned about the intentional introductions. So for instance, there were some that came in with agricultural crops. Wild parsnip is actually an example. Some came in as medicines with settlers. Garlic mustard is a good example of that, and that's gone wild. Crown vetch was imported for erosion control, another plant gone wild. Many of us know about Japanese barberry. That was a very, and still remains, a very popular landscape plant. In fact, most invasive plants were first introduced as garden ornamentals, and they continue to be sold in nurseries today. And that is SIPR's concern, that they are continuing to be sold. Once the invasive, how do the invasive plants spread from the nurseries? Well, of course, it starts with the consumer going to the nursery and buying it. And look at this map of Southern Ontario. This is Halton Master Gardener's map of nurseries. So the blue pins are nurseries that sell a wide variety of things. The green ones are native plant nurseries. So look at all the ones that are in Southern Ontario. It shouldn't be surprising that many invasive plants are found in Southern Ontario, because cities tend to be invasion hubs, especially where nurseries are located. So the gardener will buy something from the nursery, they'll take it home, they'll grow it, they'll give it away to friends, they'll maybe exchange it with someone, or they'll sell it on a marketplace. Some well-intentioned gardeners will even add invasive plants to natural areas, thinking falsely that they are beautifying an area. And sadly, there are people who dump plants behind their property into a ravine, or they'll dump it carelessly in a park area. When I go to Toronto on the GO train, I see on either side of the train, the properties are on a type of ravine, and there are invasive plants all along. All kinds of ditch lilies, because they've just been chucked out down that ravine. Once they escape from your garden, then there's unintentional spread. Or once you have them in your garden and they start spreading, there's this unintentional spread. So they'll spread by seeds, by roots, and by shoots. Water will spread them, wind will spread them, and a variety of animals, including people, will spread them. So it could be your dog, it could be on the soles of your shoes in the form of little sprouts or seeds. Little animals will move bits and pieces in woodlands, and birds are really famous for coming into someone's yard, eating the berries off of an invasive plant, and then going and pooping it into a woodland. And we see invasive plants spread along transportation hubs. I am sure you've seen Phragmites growing on the 400 highways, maybe along highways and routes in your area as well. And then aquatic invasive plants are spread, of course, by boats and that kind of thing. So why are invasive plants so popular in the nursery trade? Well, first of all, they are super easy to propagate, so they do not cost a lot of money to produce. They grow and they spread rapidly. So if you're like me, I moved to my house 30 years ago. I had a huge property. I wanted plants. I put in a lot of invasive plants, so because I knew that they would fill the property very quickly. And also they were given to me because, of course, other people were giving away invasive plants at the time. They were very attractive to gardeners. They are disease and pest resistant, so they're attractive in gardens because they don't have holes in them. And for a long time, this was a big thing, that people didn't want holes in their leaves, that aesthetics were really important to gardeners. I'm seeing a move now away from that, and gardeners are recognizing that the holes in their plants really mean that their garden is alive, because insects are eating them, or native bees, etc. And then invasive plants are really adaptable to a wide variety of conditions. They can grow in sun, to shade, in dry and in moist conditions, so they are really loved by both gardeners and growers. But these biological traits that make them invasive are what gives that plant that success. Added to that, there are novel genetics that can affect how competitive an invasive plant is and how fecund is, the fecundity, how many seeds it would produce. Many of you, again, would have seen Phragmites, as I just mentioned. So the invasive Phragmites is Phragmites australis, subspecies australis, but we have a native subspecies, subspecies americanus. It's well behaved. It causes no problem. But what happens is it hybridizes with these hybridize, and then they hybridize with our native species, and really small genetic changes have led to really highly competitive subspecies. They have improved defenses against natural enemies. They can dominate a site to exclude all other species. If you, there's an excellent video about Long Point that shows how Phragmites has invaded Long Point. In 10 years, it's totally taken over that biosphere reserve, and they find turtles that are dead within the Phragmites because they can't move, they can't get food. It's quite sad. So invasive plants cause a lot of harm. Each time a vendor sells an invasive plant, the chances for invasion success increases. This is called the propagule pressure hypothesis. When a plant with the right biological traits, those that I just mentioned, finds the right environment, because oftentimes it's to do with conditions, invasion success increases. At this point, reducing the sales of invasive plants is really key to to stopping the harm. So if we look at this invasion curve, when plants are introduced, you can prevent them. But by the time the public becomes aware of them, sometimes this can take as much as 100 years. It's very hard to eradicate them. So really the key thing is to stop adding more invasive plants to our environment, those high risk invasive plants that are sold in nurseries. The costs of invasive plants in Canada are absolutely massive. In the agricultural sector alone, the CFIA has reported 2.2 billion, not million, but billion every year for yield loss and control in the agricultural sector. What is underreported, and we don't have figures for, are impacts to animal and human health, to tourism, to recreation, and impacts on biodiversity. Many times gardeners say it's not invasive in my backyard. And in a way, I kind of understand because they don't see invasive plants spreading in their yard. So if you look at this backyard, this is actually a photo of my backyard, and we just photoshopped a dude in there, and then we added some invasive plants. What invasive plants can you spot in this backyard? Can you see the burning bush, which is flaming right here? Can you see the Japanese barberry over here? Hopefully many of you can see this periwinkle, which I photoshopped, but I made it a little bit bigger so you can see the flowers. We're going to talk about a few of these plants. What you might not be able to recognize is this is a fernleaf buckthorn. It is an absolutely stunning shrub that is in my garden, actually, this one. I've had so many compliments about it, but I learned a few years ago that it is invasive and it can form seeds and it can cross with the European buckthorn. So I removed that plant and I replaced it with a native plant. So let's talk about the harm of 3 of these plants in this picture. We're going to start with burning bush. It's also called winged euonymus. It has a few names. It's Euonymus alatus. It's native to Asia and to Central Europe. It is adaptable to a wide variety of soils, and it makes a lot of seeds. If you look at EdMaps or iNaturalist, this one is from EdMaps, you can see where burning bush has been invaded, and these are natural land spotting. This isn't burning bush in people's gardens. That's how invasive it is. You can see it all around the Great Lakes. It is highly invasive, but it tends to dominate only certain niches, this particular one. One of them is lowland forest, like you can see here on the bottom right. It is reported in High Park, Toronto, which has a forested area, and it is now regulated in border states of Maine, Minnesota, New Hampshire, as well as these other states. It should be a red alert to us when we see U.S. border states regulating plants and prohibiting them from sale. That should alert our spidey senses, and we should be very careful about those plants and adding them to our gardens. Imagine how much it would cost to remove the burning bush from this area. Imagine the impact on biodiversity, because all you can see are some trees, and pretty well the whole forest floor is covered in burning bush. There are no other native plants there. Periwinkle is another invasive that we see a lot of, and we get a lot of reports of it and photos sent to our CIFR Facebook page. It is native to Europe and Northern Africa. It crowds out native plants like trilliums, mayaples, perennial geranium, and tree seedlings. This is an image of it taken in 2021 at Beaver Conservation Area. So in this area, it is a carpet of periwinkle. You will not be able to see any trilliums there at all, or any of those other flowers. We don't know how it got there. Maybe it was planted by someone. Maybe it was dumped originally. Maybe it came along the trail with someone's animal or in someone's shoes, but it has totally covered this forest floor. If you look at it and imagine what this looks like in May, it'd be quite pretty. It would be covered in flowers, but in May only. There wouldn't be any flowers any earlier. I have lots of things flowering in my garden right now in April, and there wouldn't be anything beyond May. So the pollen here would only be available for a very limited time. There are some generalist bumblebees that will feed on periwinkle, but very few insects or other animals will. The leaves are toxic to mammals, so they won't feed on it. This is why you won't see them eaten. And there's no food for foliar insects. So again, you won't see the leaves chewed. Because no caterpillars will eat it, that means there's no caterpillars to feed the birds, so that automatically reduces bird species. And it also impacts things like reptiles and amphibians because there's nothing for them to eat either. There are no insects. This has a huge impact not only on plant species, so a negative impact on plant biodiversity, but you can see the impact it would have on animal biodiversity, and it would also have an impact on soil biota, because invasive plants tend to change the soil chemistry quite often and make it more favorable for themselves. If you think about that trillium a second ago, periwinkle is invasive from BC east to west coast. So all our floral emblems of every province, a lot of these are forest plants, woodland plants, they would all be in danger. So we are in danger of losing our natural legacy and our sense of place. Maple trees are in danger. It really affects people's mental health when they see these plants. I went on a walk last fall with Paul O'Hara, who's an amazing ecologist, and he took us for a walk in a forest, and he pointed out that this forest was a forest with no future, the one we were seeing in Oakville. And he said that because it was covered with invasive plants. The deer were over browsing. There were problems with earthworms, which cause loss in forests as well. So when we see various invasive species invading these forests, it has huge impacts. Because there's so much periwinkle here, there's no room for little tree seedlings to grow. So this forest is not able to reproduce itself. You can see that there's no little seedlings. There's some small trees, but they probably came after this periwinkle invasion. So this kind of thing I've seen on our Facebook page is impacting people's mental health, as I said. They are feeling very sad and very upset to see these lands invaded. And some have said, you know, once I've seen it, I can't unsee it. I don't even want to go walk on trails anymore. It's so upsetting to me. Another case is Japanese barberry, a completely different plant. All barberries in Canada were once banned because they carry wheat disease in wheat, an agricultural product. But in response to lobbying not long ago, 11 rust-resistant, or they were thought to be rust-resistant, cultivars were allowed in the trade. But it turns out these cultivars can also produce offspring, and the offspring can carry rust. And this is a bit of a problem sometimes when we have invasive plants that don't produce seeds. They're said to be sterile. Well, they might produce very few seeds, but they still can produce 1 or 2 seeds. And usually when those seeds germinate, the plant reverts back, and then that plant seeds prolifically. So this is another reason why I think gardeners have a hard time understanding why plants are invasive in their garden. The federal government is now asking growers not to sell cultivars like Terra, Emerald, and Emerald Carousel in wheat-producing provinces. This is very recent. The CFIA gave this warning in 2022. But the seeds of barberry are spread again by seeds and by animals with low branch. And when the branches, if they're broken, they hit the soil, they will root when they come in contact with the soil. So it spreads very easily. This plant is invading Rondo Provincial Park, so don't think that it's not invading Canada. It has impacts on crops because of the rust issue. It has impacts on biodiversity. This is Lyme, Connecticut, where Lyme diseases come from, and I'm going to talk about that. So you can see that the entire, again, forest floor is full of barberry, and we have this in Ontario as well. So again, it has economic impacts. But there is a darker side to barberry, because Japanese barberry thickets, they seem to create this beneficial habitat that supports ticks, and they support the higher population of the deer ticks. Black-legged deer ticks are twice as numerous, and they're the ones that carry Lyme disease. And as I said, in fact, this photo comes from Lyme, Connecticut, where Lyme disease was first discovered. So this is a health benefit, but it also has other largely unseen effects. As I mentioned before, a lot of invasive plants change the soil chemistry, and Japanese barberry is one of them. It makes the pH higher, more favorable for itself. This has a direct effect on herbivores and detritivores, both on the biodiversity, so the richness of it, and the biomass, the numbers. So you can see here that where there's Japanese barberry, you'll have fewer numbers of herbivores and fewer richness, so there will be fewer kinds. And that affects the detritivores as well in the same way. And this in turn influences the predator biomass and richness. So it changes the whole ecosystem of the area. And as I said, it can impact even more negatively on native plants. Infestations can cause these detrimental ecological impacts, including a decrease of native plant and animal biodiversity, and of course, threats to human health. Why is all this important? Why am I talking so much about insects? Well, we're in an insect apocalypse currently. This is what it's being called. Insects have declined globally 45% in the last 35 years. That is a huge amount. Flying insects are down 70%. Some of you may remember, depending on what your age is, in the summer seeing flying insects haloed around a porch light. You don't see that anymore. Some of you might remember insects on the windshield of your car or the bumper when you went for a drive. Something you very rarely see. As a child, I remember crickets as I walked through the lawn, walking along. I remember hearing insects in the garden at night and watching fireflies, just the magic of it. Well, I have fireflies and crickets, and I don't see the haloed lights because I keep the lights off in my garden, because that as well impacts on biodiversity and puts pressure on insects. But I have that because I've embraced native plants. E.O. Wilson, who is a Harvard biologist and a Pulitzer Prize winner, called insects the little things that run the world. We absolutely need them. They are part of a complex ecosystem. They might not need us, insects, but we certainly need them. Along with the decline of insects, we've seen a huge decline in North American birds. We've lost almost 3 billion birds since 1970. That is a huge amount of birds. A lot of our birds, the vast majority, are insectivores, so they need insects to survive. They especially need insects to feed their young. I just wanted to add Phragmites because many of you might remember that last summer, there was huge fires in Maui, and that was because of invasive grasses. So stands of invasive grasses can have impacts. The dead stalks can cause fire risks. They can release toxins sometimes. Phragmites lowers water levels. They can impact agricultural lands. They can affect drainage for agricultural farms. They are road safety hazards for sight lines, along with other plants, and they really affect recreational activities like boating and swimming, etc. These are impacts that are rarely measured by the government. Invasive plants also weaken ecosystems and make them more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And we know that climate change is a huge threat right now. I'm in the process of wondering whether I need to buy a new house because as my husband and I are aging, we have a large house, we're thinking of downsizing. As I look at smaller homes, some of them in older parts of the city, they are covered in English ivy, covered in periwinkle. There is no way that I would have the energy or be able to remove those plants. So I'd have to pay for it. And I think this whole thing of how much would it cost to remove invasive plants, I think this is going to start to affect home sales as we understand more and more of the negative impacts. This is something that's already happening in other areas like Great Britain. If you have Japanese knotweed, on your property in Great Britain. Sometimes you can't get a mortgage, sometimes you can't get insurance, sometimes it really impedes the sale of your house. So I can see this becoming more important in Ontario. The plants you choose in your garden make a huge difference. I already have explained to you that invasive plants are bullies in the garden. They create dead zones. They actually can kill forests. They also tend to support invasive insects, such as an example is the spotted lanternfly or the marmorated stink bug, both of which are threats to agriculture. They also tend to be less nutritious for our native birds, so they don't give them the proteins, the fats that they require. Non-native plants, while they might not do direct harm, don't always support very many species. So they might support some non-native species such as the European honeybee or starlings. They could support generalist species and some generalist bees, but it's limited what they support. When I first started native plant gardening, I went to cultivars, but you have to be careful with cultivars. For instance, this Annabelle hydrangea was bred so that the flowers were really big. They're not actually flowers. What you're seeing here are bracts because the flowers have been bred out of the plant. So there's actually no pollen there for the bees. And one of the first cultivars I put in my garden was this red Diablo 9-bark. 9-bark is an excellent native plant, but when you change the color of the leaves to make it more attractive to gardeners, you change the chemistry of the leaves. The chemistry of the leaves is what makes it red. Once you've changed the chemistry, it might not be palatable to the Lepidoptera species that would have eaten the leaves or any of the insect species. So when you're choosing plants for your garden, I do encourage you to choose native plants as much as you can and to focus on keystone plants, which are plants that support greater numbers of species. That has the biggest impacts on biodiversity. And that's why we're talking about this, because invasive plants are harming biodiversity. So I hope I've explained what the harm is, and I hope the next time you hear a gardener say, oh, it's not invasive in my yard, that you can reply to that person why that is perhaps a problem. So I'm going to talk now about why plants are still sold in nurseries if they're invasive, right? So there's a model that's been put out, a collaborative approach to addressing invasive plants in Canada, and it looks really good. We have the CFIA working with provincial and territorial governments and non-governmental stakeholders for the early prevention, detection, rapid response, management, and awareness of invasive species. But who is responsible for invasive plants? It's the CFIA, the Canada Food Inspection Agency. They have regulatory control over invasive plants. But look at their name, Food Inspection Agency. Their focus is on food security. It is not on the environment, and it is not on human health, even though we're in a biodiversity crisis. So if you look closer at the laws under the under the CFIA, there is the Seeds Act and the Plant Protection Act. The Seeds Act protects quality of seeds sold in Canada, whereas the Plant Protection Act protects plants in agriculture and forestry. And again, look at that, agriculture and forestry. Neither was intended to protect the environment or public health. The Seeds Act helps us to regulate plants that are regulated as noxious weed seeds in agricultural products. So for instance, purple loosestrife is regulated as a seed in agricultural products. So that limits the amount of it that can be in an agricultural product. But seed contamination is not the pathway of spread of invasive purple loosestrife. It actually spreads via sale, and now it's spreading via water, etc. So that really doesn't help. If we go back to the Plant Protection Act, they can actually protect plants, not just seeds, and they can declare them a quarantine pest. But in order to do that, they have to meet 3 criteria. They have to have impacts of economic importance. Remember that word economic, it's very important. They cannot be widely distributed. If they're already widely distributed, the CFIA says, sorry, we can't do anything. If there are, even though they could spread further into wider areas, and if there are no control measures already in place, they will not declare them a quarantine pest. So as a result, very few plants are followed through, and there's no regulatory action to the invasive plant. In all of Canada, only 25 taxa are prohibited, and most of those were done many, many years ago. Very few have been added recently. And given that invasive plants have exploded everywhere, this is a huge concern. When you look at this list, the ones in blue are the ones that are from the horticultural trade. But when you think about it, if the primary pathway for invasive plants is the horticultural trade, why aren't more of them from the horticultural trade? This is a huge issue. And even of the ones that are in blue from the horticultural trade, there are some Barbary species that have been exempted, some of those cultivars that I mentioned. So there are even fewer of those that are regulated.
Who's the hero in that situation, right? Obviously.
I wonder if Cheryl can mute her microphone. Thank you, Cheryl. So let's go back to this collaborative approach. This means it pushes everything down to the provincial, the territorial governments, and non-governmental stakeholders. When you look at the map of Canada, really regulations are all over the map. No Canadian regulations focus on the horticultural trades. There are taxonomy or naming issues all across the country. We talked to the BC, they had an invasive plant working group, and they were using common names to regulate plants. And with a common name, you actually don't know what plant you're talking about. So, and there are different provinces will use different names for different plants because taxonomy does evolve and it's very confusing. If you look at the provinces and territories, 5 of them have no lists of any plants at all. 6 of them do have noxious weed lists. But they tend to be those weedish species. They don't tend to be plants that are sold in the horticultural trade. Only 2 of them have invasive alien plant lists, and PEI has just 1 taxa that is regulated, and that's Lythrum, purple loosestrife species. Manitoba is really ahead of things and having a very robust list of 21 aquatic plants. But look at this, we are a province of water. 21 aquatic plants are regulated in Manitoba, but there's nothing to stop them, to stop invasive plants from Ontario or other provinces from moving from one place to another. So invasive plants don't respect borders. We need federal leadership for the public good, clarity, and fairness across all provinces. So what can we do? Well, SIPR thinks that we need policy and legislative change. We need to recognize that nature has value, not just economics. So yes, it's important to regulate and protect forestry and agriculture, but we are not protecting nature, and nature is also important. So we need to include biodiversity. Other areas have done this. The U.S. Plant Protection Act explicitly protects the environment, agriculture, and the economy. The Australia Biosecurity Act and the New Zealand one do the same thing. The EU has now regulations on invasive alien species, so it's being done in other areas. We could do it as well. One of the problems is this model that I showed you was developed in 2011. The International Plant Protection Convention and the World Trade Organization began to make changes after this to their policies. They recognized that the spread of invasive species was a global problem, and in a multilateral treaty with the IPPC, they made some changes. They revised the guidance. They said if the plant is not widely distributed, even if the plant is not widely distributed, and it can cause economic loss, you can regulate it. And they talked about what economic loss meant. And it wasn't just loss in forestry and in agriculture. It was loss in environmental concerns. So loss of biodiversity, loss of insect life, loss of harm, different kinds of harm. And it specifically said that decisions based on this narrow set of market values of nature are underpinning the global diversity crisis. So Canada really has failed to modernize our policies in view of this revised guidance. So we need to account for environmental concerns in economic terms as advised by the IPPC. With improved regulations, the EU and New Zealand have banned Tree of Heaven. I find this really interesting. In February 2021, the CFIA issued an alert. They actually said on their website, do not plant tree of heaven. Consider removing tree of heaven for your property. But it's still available for sale in many areas. And it was still available in Ontario until very recently. It's regulated in the border states you can see on the screen, and it's now restricted in Ontario as of November 2023. As I mentioned, it is one of the hosts of spotted lanternfly and of marmorated stink bug, and it is now a tree of union concern, an invasive alien species. Canada has agreed to reduce the rates of introduction and establishment of non-native invasive species by 50% by 2030. This is part of the UN Convention on Biodiversity, which happened in Montreal in 2022, pardon me. And we know that if you're going to do that, this is where you're going to start. You have to start with prevention. It's not going to work if you stop it once the invasion curve is there. So we need risk assessments pre-border before the plants arrive. All new plant species should be assessed before import. This is paid for by the importers in Australia and New Zealand with the laws that they have. So this is not going to cost Canadian taxpayers more money. In fact, in the long run, it will save money. And then for plants that are already here post-border, they should be assessed in priority of the ones that are doing harm. And when we find that plants are high risk, they are at high risk of invading areas and doing harm, we should stop those sales. We should really monitor sleeper species. There are a number of species like Japanese spirea, periwinkle. Periwinkle, I think, should be regulated, but there are a lot of species that we're seeing that their range is moving. We should be very careful of those. We need all this information that is gathered by scientists and others in a national shared database so that taxonomy issues are not a problem from province to province. We all know what we're talking about. We already have lots of lists. The Credit Valley Conservation Authority has a superb list. There's 188 plants in it. The ones in yellow are the ones that are still sold in Ontario. So they have a really good list if you're looking for invasive plant lists. The Auditor General of Ontario in 2022 came out with a list of 28 plants which should not be sold or shared in Ontario and should be regulated. The ones with the stars are still sold. I'm not sure, the daylily one is actually the ditch lily. I don't know that that's, I'm saying it's sold, but I'm not sure that it's sold in the industry. But many of the other ones still are, such as goutweed. We need to look to the border states. They are really getting good at regulating plants. Maine has 63 plants on the do not plant list. This has doubled in a year the number of plants. There are really good lists. We could start with these lists of high-risk ornamental plants. These are plants such as tree of heaven, Japanese barberry, etc., which are regulated in at least 4 border states and in some Ontario provinces. Let's start with those. We know that those are invasive. I think that consumers deserve to know. So SIPR is asking for point of sale labeling. Plants are products like anything else. Consumers have a right to know if plants can cause harm, and labels should inform consumers of how to prevent the harm. So here's an example from New York State. Something like burning bush would have a label on it saying that it's harmful to the environment. It would recommend an alternative species, and it would have some planting cautions. Don't plant this near natural areas, deadhead, do not share. And also, SIPR feels very strongly it should have the correct botanical name. We had a SIPR member who told the story of going to a nursery and buying a red maple, which she wanted. She thought it was our native Acer rubrum. When she got it home, she found out it was a cultivar of the invasive Norway maple. So not the plant at all that she wanted. So here are our solutions. We think to protect our economy, our environment, and public health from invasive plants, and really to save taxpayers money, we need to improve policies and legislation. We need that invasive plant database that is shared nationally so everyone has the information. We need those risk assessments pre and post border. We need to then ban the sale of high risk invasive plants right away. We require labeling so consumers know what they're buying. And we need some stable funding for education so that people are better informed. Rather than spending countless dollars mopping up the mess, We really need to turn off that faucet and close that primary pathway for invasive plants, which is the horticultural and also the pet aquarium trades. Here are 10 action items, things that you as an individual can do. So be informed. Know which plants are high-risk plants. So check the invasive plant list. Know what's sold and what's regulated. Be a role model. If you have invasive plants in your garden, remove them and don't give them to someone else. Encourage others to remove them from their gardens as well. I know this isn't always easy. Educate others by posting on social media or sharing. We've got lots of social media information on our website. And when someone says it's not invasive in my yard, explain to them how birds will carry the seeds in natural areas. And the problem isn't your yard. The problem is the natural area where we're losing biodiversity. Make it real by sharing photos of invaded natural areas. People cannot argue when they see huge swaths of periwinkle or pachysandra or goutweed or any of the other invasive plants. When you're at a nursery or a public garden, I invite you to speak out respectfully and tell them why the plants that they have there are inappropriate. In a public garden, encourage them to put signage so that people are not encouraged to buy this plant and put it in their garden. We have some materials, I think, on our SIPR Facebook page, letters and other materials on how to speak to nurseries in a respectful fashion. Write about it in a blog or in a post. Put it in your hort newsletters. Tell your stories of invasive plants in your garden and spread the words about SIPR. Become a supporter individually. Our white paper, our second edition of our white paper is now ready and it's going to be launched on Earth Day, we're hoping. And our next phase is to get supporters so that we can launch a petition. So we need individual names. Add your name as a supporter, please. Volunteer with a stewardship program that removes invasive plants in your area. And as a hort society, there's so much that you can do. Reach out to other environmental groups, garden and service clubs. In your own hort society, I encourage you to revise your floral show guidelines and not allow invasive plants in your floral shows, in your plant sales as well. I'm already seeing this in so many of your districts and your individual hort societies, and bravo to those who've already done that. I also look at your floral emblems and your logos. Some of you, and I know this, and I know some of you are aware of it, some of you have interesting plants as floral logos. So think about that and think of the information that's currently on your website. Sometimes information is old or outdated and needs to be revised. So those are lots of things for you to do. Thank you to individuals and to hort societies who have become SIPR supporters. We are so grateful to Ontario Horticultural Association Executive who also support SIPR and have lent their logo to our site. And we have lots of hort societies that have done this. So please add yours to it. If you want more information, of course, information about invasive species is on our SIPR sites, but also invasive species information is on our Halton Master Gardener site, as well as our Master Gardener of Ontario site. Under resources, I put a few fact sheets on how to manage invasive plants in your own garden. And then on our Facebook pages, we try to share information. You can always post questions on our Master Gardener of Ontario Facebook page. Thank you very much for listening.
Claudette, we have just one question right now. If we were to remove our burning bushes, periwinkle, etc., would you be able to suggest similar but beneficial alternatives?
Yes, first of all, I would start by looking at the Grow Me Instead guides that the Ontario Invasive Species puts out. They have some really nice suggestions. But then I would say that there are so many great plant lists these days. So instead of burning bush, you want to, first of all, what you want is not necessarily to reproduce exactly the same shrub. But what you might want to look at is, where is that burning bush? What are the conditions in my garden? So if it's in full sun, like they often are, and in a dry condition, look for another shrub that matches those conditions. And there are lots of beautiful ones. Things that come to mind are things like, well, New Jersey tea is an absolutely gorgeous shrub, which is also a host plant for butterflies. So you'll be growing a gorgeous shrub, which has long-lasting, beautiful flowers, nice foliage in the fall, And I've got to say burning bush only looks good in the fall, and then to me just barely. But in any case, there's a beautiful little shrub, and you'll be growing butterflies. I find that extremely exciting. Look to In Our Nature. They are a nursery that has a huge amount of plant lists, and they have specific ones for alternatives to invasive plants. I think you said periwinkle, Rebecca. Was that the ground cover?
Yeah,
Well,
they were asking about periwinkle and the burning bush, yes.
so for periwinkle for a ground cover, look for alternative ground covers. There are so many. But I will say with periwinkle, I got rid of it about 10 years ago in my garden. It's still there. So once you've try to get rid of it all as much as possible. You can work in small sections if you have a large garden. So get rid of a square meter, and then try and replant an area as soon as possible so that it doesn't get reinvaded. But you're going to have to watch that area for quite a number of years. So things that come to mind, if it's a sunny area, I think Tiarella, cordifolia, or stolonifera, which is the same plant, is good for sunny areas. There's 21 ground covers in the In Our Nature list, and of course, bringing them out of my, trying to think of what they are is another thing. A lot of native strawberries are good ground covers. They have pretty little flowers. The strawberries are edible, even though they're tiny, they're delicious. And I find that chipmunks eat those strawberries in my garden instead of eating my cherry tomatoes. Barren strawberry is another alternative, beautiful yellow flowers. A lot of sedges make beautiful ground covers and also are host plants for native butterflies. I'm trying to think of something else. There are so many plants, but unfortunately, depending on the conditions, if you have a shadier condition, ferns are absolutely gorgeous. And there are some ferns that don't do badly in drier conditions. They tend to like moist, but some do okay in drier conditions. Canada anemone will take over, so that is a good one, but it can be aggressive. So you might have to limit it with by putting it in a tub or putting some kind of a border shield on it. But it's a beautiful plant with gorgeous flowers. There's all kinds. I will try and include Kelly or Rebecca. I can send you some sites to look at, for alternative plants. But I would suggest you don't always go for a one-to-one alternative. Like, don't necessarily look for something that looks the same. Look for plants that support butterflies. Who is it? I'm trying to think. I just did it the other day. The Upper Thames Valley Conservation Authority. They have a list of plants that are all host plants for butterflies. The Xerces Society have a list of plants that support native beneficial insects. When you put those kind of plants in your garden, then you won't have the Japanese beetles in your garden because the beneficial insects will eat the Japanese beetles, or you won't have as many, or they'll eat the aphids. It just keeps your garden in balance, and I think you'll have a more exciting garden.
Okay, we've had
that gives you some ideas.
a few more questions come in.
Sure.
How should we dispose of invasive plants in our garden?
That's a really good question. So it depends a little bit on the plant. Some of them can grow, something like lily of the valley and goutweed grow from roots. So I wouldn't put any of them in the compost. I'm going to tell you that right now. Don't compost any of them. Probably the safest thing to do, and it depends where you live, the safest thing is to put them in a black garbage bag, the plant material. And if you have a lot of it, you can just put it in a driveway if possible, or a sunny area where you can solarize it. After a week or so, you'll find that even if the garbage bag was full, the plant material will have shrunk, it will have rotted away. And then you can keep adding plant material to it, keep solarizing it. And that way you're really killing the material. Again, depending on what plant it is, at that point, it could be put in municipal yard waste, depending, or it can always be put in garbage. If you're in a rural area, be very careful about putting it in a garbage bag and then throwing it in if there's a bin type of thing, because that is one way that invasive plants will spread. So I would suggest in that case, do that, cooking it in the garbage bag, first of all. If you have a large enough property, you can make a huge pile of invasive plants. You can tarp it, you can put stones or bricks around it, and you can keep it covered. And it just as a big pile, and you can keep adding to it. And just make sure, check it every once in a while, make sure nothing is escaping. You can also, if you have a larger garden, you can put it in a barrel of water, and you can sort of you can drown it, rot it. That can be a little bit smelly. It's not the best recommendation, but it is an alternative. So the easiest and probably the best alternative is black garbage bags and solarizing them, like with heat, to really kill them so that there's almost no material left in there. Be very careful about seed heads. Some remain quite viable. Some will produce seeds, even if you cut, like garlic mustard, if you cut it and there's a flower on the plant, it will produce a seed sometimes, and there are other plants like that. So there are a number of strategies to get rid of them. Err on the safest side, and the black garbage bag is a really good one. Don't put them in your compost.
So to go along with the how do we dispose of them, somebody's asking, how do we get rid of them from the yard?
Well, that ranges all the way from, I would say, the most challenging invasive plant, which is Japanese knotweed, to I'm going to shock some people, but an easier one, goutweed. I know one of our master gardeners said if you have goutweed in your garden, the best way to get rid of it is put a for sale sign on your garden, because he thought it was a terrible invasive plant. That one I've gotten rid of in my garden. I didn't have too much trouble. Periwinkle is a challenge. English ivy is a challenge. So it varies. Oh, creeping bellflower, huge challenge. It varies with the plant, its structure. If it has a long taproot, like creeping bellflower, very difficult to eradicate, because that root can go down really, really deeply. I did write a fact sheet about how to get rid of creeping bellflower. I researched it all last year. I think I can remember much of it. No, not today. But it's on the Master Gardeners of Ontario website, and it's also on the Halton Master Gardeners website. So it is extensive. That's just for creeping bellflower. For something like periwinkle, goutweed, English ivy, I tend to work like a square foot, a square meter at a time, and I dig them up. And for a lot of plants, this is a solution. Use a garden fork, work when the soil is moist. This is a good time to be working to get rid of invasive plants. Lift the soil, try and remove as much of the plant and the root as possible, because it will spread from the smallest, teeniest piece of root. Put them in the, shake the soil off, put them in the garbage can. Look at that square meter of soil again, garden area, and keep on working at that. 15 minutes, an hour a week, 15 minutes a day, an hour a week, whatever you can afford. If it's in your garden, start in the invasion front. So where it's going out and come inside. Don't start in the middle. Don't start near your house. Start in the invasion front and work back. Sort of narrow the circle so that you make it smaller and smaller all the time. Make it as manageable for yourself as possible. Once they're removed, if there are seed heads, if it's a plant that has, like garlic mustard, produces seed heads, get a line clipper, whatever they're called, that you can cut the heads off and remove the material or stop them from going to seed. Take a shovel. Sometimes taking a shovel and just cutting them at soil depth works and severs the plant from the roots. Again, it really depends on the plant. Japanese knotweed is the only one that I would say I did probably 3 weeks of research last year on it. And if you have a stand of Japanese knotweed, it is very challenging. If you have individual knotweeds and it's they're just brand new, you might be able to smother them and continually chop them. Kathy has had some success in her property up north in doing that. But everything that I read about Japanese knotweed, if it's an established stand, it can have roots that go over 10 feet away. And once you cut them, you encourage the roots to spread. So that actually happened in my garden. I had Japanese knotweed, I cut it, it spread into my neighbor's garden. So the best advice they're saying now is you spray it with glyphosate, or Roundup, but you have to do it in a window. And I'm trying to remember, I think it's 3 weeks before frost, 5 weeks before frost. Again, I have a very detailed fact sheet on how to do that. It's on our Master Gardeners of Ontario website. You only spray it the once, and usually that is very effective, but you have to have that window when the plant is translocating its energy, and the energy is going back into the roots. When it does that, you can spray and the spray goes into the roots. You do it very carefully. I know we don't like to use glyphosate in gardens, and I know it's actually not approved for use with Japanese knotweed. I'm going to be very honest with you. It's approved for poison ivy, for plants that are a risk to human health, but we are actually going to talk to the government and hope that they are going to make a change to that. And we are hoping for a future change. So as of now, your only alternative is probably to hire a pesticide licensed person who could do that. I know that was a long answer to my question. I apologize. Sometimes I get very wordy.
That's okay. Kelly, I think you can answer this next one. Will the link to the recording be sent to societies?
Absolutely. As soon as we get the video finalized, I will get an email out to all of our societies and clubs with a video link, and I will also be asking Claudette if she can provide a few of the links she's talked about in our Q&A, but I'll connect with her after to get those links. So we'll send out a fulsome package with everything.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly. Claudette, Carolyn asks, I want to plant high bush cranberry. A good choice or no?
Usually the cranberries like an acidic soil, so it really depends on your soil conditions. They're a beautiful plant because they're buzz pollinated by native bees, by bumblebees, and actually like other bees, like honeybees, non-native bees, they can't pollinate them. So they're a really cool choice. They are also a keystone plant, so they support a good number of species. I've read different things just recently, so they do like acidic soils, is my recollection. I'd have to double check that. Sometimes if you have a plant that likes an acidic soil, like a blueberry, you can grow it in a container. But the other thing I've heard, and I think this makes sense, is that they tolerate less acidic soils better than we think they do. Now, I don't think you can really change your soil to make it more acidic, but you might want to try to just double check what the pH level for the high bush cranberry is. And I'm saying high bush cranberry, I was thinking blueberry, so it might not be a buzz pollinated plant. My apologies there. But in any case, check what the pH level is required for that plant, and then get a simple test kit from the store and test the pH of your soil. I have a feeling, yes, high bush cranberry, as long as your conditions are right, it would probably be a beautiful shrub to add. And I think it has that fall color.
Thank you. Candace asks, why did the auditor put Manitoba maple on the list when Vascan says it is native in Ontario?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Very good one as well. The Credit Valley Conservation also had it on their invasive plant list, and they removed it. So remember when I said a plant is native to a region? It is native to some areas in Ontario. So yes, it is native to Manitoba, but it's not native everywhere in Ontario. And what's happened is it's been so overplanted, and it tends to be a weedy species which drops seeds everywhere and grows everywhere. So now it is native in some areas, but in other areas where it's invaded, it's not native. So it's seen as an invasive plant there. There are a few plants that fall into that category. So when we're talking about native to a region, sometimes the region is very small. And if it leaves that region or leaves that ecosystem, sometimes it can outcompete other native plants and act like that invasive plant. And indeed, it is invasive in that condition, in that it's not native to that region and that particular area. It's kind of a nuanced thing. Manitoba maple isn't as well, like I hear the concern. It's not a species that we would recommend you plant. There are many other maple species that would be better in your garden. I can't see anyone buying a Manitoba maple or planting it in their garden. Perhaps I'm wrong, but so well, I get a long answer for a short question.
Thank you. Kathleen just posted a comment just saying silverweed is a nice alternative to periwinkle. And Candace has put in the chat section a link to a plant selector site. If anybody wants to write that down, it's birdgardens.ca/plant-selector. Saying it's a great plant selector page.
Yeah, there's all kinds of them. As I said, In Our Nature is excellent. It's just inournature.ca. Ontario Native Plants has a what is it called? It's you can put down the conditions. It sorts the plants. So you can say, I want something for sun, for clay soil, zone 6, and I want a shrub. So it'll suggest a shrub for you. I think that is one of the best ways to find plants.
Perfect. A couple more questions. I have Phragmites growing in the roadside ditch that flows to the Conservation Authority lake. It has killed all the local cattails. How can I get rid of it that does not harm the water?
Wow. I would have to, I know that there are ways of getting rid of it. If you are near the Conservation Authority, it might be worthwhile to speak to them and see if they can help you in some way. There are specific ways of getting rid of Phragmites. It's going to depend on the size of the stand and the gardener's capacity to eradicate it. If you can remind me, Kelly, to send some information, I will send what I have on it, but I think it's fairly detailed. I think there's a flooding option, there's a fire option, although having said that, don't set fire to your ditch, please, because there are oftentimes it's illegal because it's not your property, and oftentimes it will spread to your house and burn your house down too. But there are some options. These fire options are usually done by knowledgeable personnel who know how to do this, but let me look that up. There's also a new biocontrol for Phragmites, and I don't think people are able to buy it themselves, but maybe you can contact the Conservation Authority. Maybe they can support you there. Sorry for the very bad answer for that one.
Thank you. So we have another one. Any tips for getting rid of invasive plants around the base of trees without harming the tree itself? I have ditch lilies around an apple tree and garlic mustard around a juniper.
Yeah, for the ditch lily, I would suggest that you constantly cut the green very carefully. You can maybe use a sharp knife to do it. So just at ground level, you want to try and damage the surface roots of the tree as much as possible. You want to not damage the roots of the tree. So I wouldn't necessarily use a shovel, but maybe a knife or something just to cut them repeatedly at ground level. You can add, I think the person said it was a pear tree, you can add a little bit of mulch around. You have to be careful about how much mulch you add under trees. Sometimes that will help to suppress the plant, but ditch lilies are very hard to get rid of. They are surprisingly hard. I've seen them, the roots thrown on a shed roof and left for a couple of months. They're still alive in the hot sun. So be prepared for some patience. And was garlic mustard the other one?
Yes, garlic mustard around a juniper.
So garlic mustard is just a matter of, again, cutting it at ground level, removing that plant material and cutting them. So garlic mustard is a biennial. In the first season, you'll have like a rosette, which does not flower. In the second season, it will have a flower. So cut it at ground level, stop it from producing that flower stalk. That is the best way. And then if it's under your junipers, again, you might be able to put some layers of newspaper down once you've gotten rid of all that material and put a light mulch over top of that. And that should help with your garlic mustard issue. And then if I don't know exactly what it looks like under your juniper, but depending on what it looks like, you might be able to put an aggressive native ground cover like a Canada anemone could be put there. But again, you may want to keep that contained. It's a beautiful plant and I love it. I have it in my garden, but it can run, that's for sure.
In a similar vein to those two questions, somebody's wondering if you have any tips for dog strangling vine around the base of trees.
Oh, I've never dealt with dog strangling vine, but the big issue there are the seed pods. I have to check and see whether there's an issue with the root I'm not as familiar with dog strangling vine, but I would for sure stop it from producing seed pods. And actually I would stop it from producing green material because it is a member of the milkweed family and monarchs will be attracted to it. They'll lay their eggs on it and none of the caterpillars will survive. So I would probably cut that at ground level if possible. I would just need to double check on the root of that, how I think it's mostly propagated from seed, but it would, there are best management practices, and I believe the Ontario Invasive Plant Council has it for dog strangling vine. They certainly have it for Phragmites, which was mentioned a little bit. We do need to dig and get the crown of the dogs. Yes, someone has said you do need to get the crown and the root out. But initially, I would work on just stopping any green parts of it. Again, it depends on the size of it, but just clip it at the base and get rid of it. Stop it from continuing to sprout. If Kathy can have success repeatedly cutting her Japanese knotweed in her property, I think you can probably do the same thing with dog strangling vine, but you have to be persistent. You can't let it grow at all. It has to be at least on a weekly basis, if not more. You have to watch it.
Okay, so just a couple of comments and one more question, and then we have to wrap it up. Where am I here? Where's the other one gone? Oh, just a comment from Sharon, just saying high bush cranberry tolerates a wide range of soils. And a comment from Kat McGill. A great book with lots of lists of plants and for all conditions is The Gardener's Guide to Native Plants of Southern Great Lakes region. Oh, that one that she's holding.
There it
up
is
in
right
the-
there. It's Rick Gray and Sean Booth's new book. Sean Booth is the In Our Nature guy. It's amazing. I love it. It's like my new Bible. You will all want it. It's widely available on the internet. Just search. It's available on Amazon. Rick Gray has links to it on his website. So it is really well written. I love it for Southern Ontario. It's excellent.
Perfect. So one other comment and one quick question. Candace says you do need to dig and get the crown of the dog strangling vine root. Do not pull it, it will double. And our final question, is lily of the valley considered invasive?
Oh yes, lily of the valley is definitely invasive. We have lots of photos of it invading natural lands, and I would treat it similarly to, I've had it in my property and gotten rid of it. I would treat it similarly to periwinkle or English ivy in that I cut it at ground level and I just remove, and then sometimes dig out depending on if it's in where roots are. It's a little bit harder to dig out, and it can grow in the root system of trees, but it's just persistence for sure. And thank you for the person who checked on the high bush cranberry. When they said high bush cranberry, I was thinking of blueberries for sure.
Okay, we are good, Kelly.
Thank you, Charlene. On behalf of the Ontario Horticultural Association and everyone here tonight, thank you so much, Claudette, for such an informative and educational talk. We are very appreciative for your knowledge and your experience and for sharing your insights with us tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed my evening tonight. Thank you for inviting me. Good night.
So next up, we are going to invite Karen Redmond and Kathy Luma, who are our District 8 and District 7 convention hosts for this year's convention. Are you there, Karen and Kathy?
I'm here. Kathy is coming on shortly. She's here. There she is. Okay. So I'm Karen Redmond from District 8.
And I'm Kathy Bowma from District 7.
And we are the co-hosts for the 116th Convention and AGM being held in Guelph, July 12th to the 14th.
Registration is open and we want you to come and be part of this convention, as the next convention after that is in 2 years' time, so you don't want to miss this one. Book your room at the hotel if you're not staying with family or friends, but do it now as well. Early bird registration ends May 10th, and then the price does increase a little bit.
We have great plenary speakers lined up and interesting topics from our afternoon speakers, seminar speakers. Details are all on the website.
And there are 4 local bus trips on Friday, and they are repeated again on the Saturday. Details of those trips are all on the Garden Ontario website under convention.
Friday night is the silent auction along with entertainment by a magician and music by a DJ.
And competitions will be on display. One-day vendors will be in attendance on Friday and Saturday.
Welcome back, everybody. We're pleased to have you for the second half of the presentation. Before we go any further, if you're not already a member of a society or a club within the OHA, we encourage you to consider joining. We currently have over 26,000 members right across Ontario. Please go to the Garden Ontario website and click on the Resources tab at the top of the page, then scroll down to Manuals and Guides. We have an excellent Benefits of Belonging document that lists all the things that the OHA provides. The document is downloadable and printable. You can also contact your local society or speak to your district director or to any of the officers. Contact information is available on the Garden Ontario website About page. We would love to have you join us. Right now, I would like to pass over to Sandra Ramelier. Sandra?
Thank you. So I'm part of the OHA Conservation and Environment Committee. The other members of the committee are Karen Redmond, Christine Webb, Brad King, Leslie Daniels, Deborah Bellevue, and Joyce Schlegel. So lately we've been working on a couple of documents. One of them is with the help of the OHA Judging Committee, but this is our one on plant sales, and we're trying to obviously prevent the sale of invasive plants at our plant sales. So we thought if you could have this posted at your sale, we know that most of the HORT members are aware of these best practices and they're already doing them, but a lot of people in the community may not be as aware, and the education would be beneficial for them and also would help the spread of these invasive plants. So you see pictured there, the periwinkle, the goutweed, lily of the valley, the ditch lilies, some of the ones that we've already talked about. We also have information about the Ontario Invasive Plant Council. So there's more information that you can find out there. That's where you can also get the Grow Me Instead guides. They have the one for the southern one, the northern one, and also a French one. So this is the same poster, same information, but it's in the white if it makes it easier for you to photocopy or make copies of that to have out at your sales. It also talks about solarizing, what Claudette mentioned about getting rid of your plants in a black garbage bag and putting them in the sun to kill them. So that's what we've been working on for plant sales. We also got some information from the judges at the OHA for flower shows, and we kind of used their information to put together this little flyer, and hopefully that can be out at your shows as well, so that when people are putting English ivy in or creeping Jenny in their arrangements, you can mention why it's not advisable and that it's invasive. So we're hoping to do other newsletters. Those two, the plant sale and the flower show, right now they're in the latest articles in the Trillium on page 20 and 21. So you may have already seen them. And I know that Kelly has also sent them out to all the societies, so they're available there. Now, one of our members, Joyce Schlegel, on our committee, she is also the OHA rep on the Ontario Invasive Plant Council. And she put together this great little presentation. Unfortunately, she isn't able to be here, so I will hopefully do a good job presenting for her in her place. So right now you see the dog strangling vine that grows aggressively by wrapping itself around anything in its path, trees and other plants. It forms a dense infestation that overwhelms and crowds out native plants and young trees, preventing forest regeneration. And we saw that with the periwinkle as well. So who is the Invasive Plant Council? They're individuals and organizations who are concerned with the growing threat of invasives. They provide leadership, expertise, and a forum to engage and empower Ontarians to take action on invasive species. So what are invasive species? They're introduced accidentally or deliberately. And we saw Claudette had all that information in her presentation. So the loosestrife that you see here was once a popular garden plant, introduced deliberately and has now gone wild. A mature plant can produce as many as 2.5 million seeds in a growing season. And you're not likely going to spot the seeds because they're tiny, like little grains of sand. Giant hogweed is another example of an invasive plant that is extremely harmful to humans. The sap can result in severe burns and blisters to the skin and the eyes, and can cause sensitivity to sunlight for several years. It arrived in North America in the early 1900s as an ornamental garden plant. If you find giant hogweed on your property, contact EDMAPS, which stands for Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System. That's edmaps.ca. And they keep track of all these different things that are coming into the area. By reducing a large population of giant hogweed will take a long-term commitment. The seeds of giant hogweed can remain viable in the soil for up to 15 years. So it's almost impossible to get rid of. After an invasive species arrives, obviously it's more costly and difficult to get rid of it. Norway maple is a shade-tolerant deciduous tree with prolific seed production and the ability to establish in a variety of soil types. It was first introduced into the United States for cultivation as an ornamental tree in 1756. In Canada, Norway maple is planted widely in cities and towns after World War II because it's reliable, it grows quickly, and it was a replacement for the white elms after they were decimated by the Dutch elm disease. This is an example of one of the Ontario Invasive Plant Council's fact sheets, and they have a number of different ones on their website. So please visit there to get more information. Phragmites, everybody recognizes this. In the 1800s, when cargo ships arrived from Europe carrying railroad and building materials to the Eastern American ports, they also carried the seeds of the aggressive reed known as Phragmites. They quickly spread across the US and Canada, causing damage to Ontario's biodiversity, wetlands, and beaches. But you see at the bottom, in the green box, there's some studies going underway. 2 brown moths from Eurasia, which are natural enemies of Phragmites. They're hoping to introduce those in our area, and research is being done by the University of Waterloo, University of Toronto. They're doing some pilot projects, so we'll see just how effective these moths are as an eradication measure. Claudette also mentioned about the spotted lanternfly, It's a colorful insect in its adult form, and it's been recognized as a potential threat to grapevines, fruit trees, and the forestry industry in Canada. It was first detected in North America in Pennsylvania in September of 2014 and has quickly spread. It may already be in Ontario. It was in Pennsylvania and New York State last fall. So they're saying if you do see it, take a picture of it and report it to that EdMaps so they can start getting locations of where it is and working on eradicating that. Jumping worms. We had a very good talk last Earth Day about jumping worms. They're still around. There's been confirmed sightings in Windsor, Greater Toronto, Hamilton, Ancaster, Brantford. Their presence should have gardeners on high alert. Instead of improving the soil structure and fertility like our good guy earthworms, jumping worms degrade and damage the topsoil to such an extent that plants fail to thrive. They are larger than normal earthworms with a whitish collar. They move back and forth like a snake and thrash about when they're out of the soil. If you do see them, again, report it to EdMaps. There's a new invasive worm. You may have heard it just recently on the news in St. Thomas called the hammerhead worm. There's not a picture of it here, but it has a flat body and a head shaped like a hammerhead shark. They can be brownish in color, spotted, or colorfully striped. They are predators and cannibals. Their neurotoxins are extremely potent, and humans handling them may suffer skin irritation. If you spot the hammerhead worm, contact EdMaps. And this is the infographic that was created by Dr. Michael McTavish from the University of Toronto. So you can see the soil is loose and crumbly, looks like coffee grounds, but that's actually the worm poop on the surface of the soil. The cocoon looks like peppercorns, so very hard to find. If you want to test for jumping worms, this is something new that I didn't know. Mark off 1 square foot area that you'd like to test. Blend together 1/3 cup of ground hot yellow mustard with 1 gallon of water. Pour half of this mixture very slowly over your 1 foot area. Wait several minutes and then pour out the rest. All the worms in the vicinity will rise up to the surface, making it so much easier to observe and identify them. It's highly irritating. The mustard it's not deadly to the worms and it won't hurt your plants, but it's a good way to find out if you have suspicions that you've got jumping worms. That's one way to tell. And we've all talked about these Grow Me Instead guides. So they're available on the Ontario Invasive Plants.ca website, or you can just type in Grow Me Instead on the Google website and they'll pull it up right away. So this can help you. It gives you pictures of alternatives, gives you pictures of what the invasive plant is, so you can make some choices. And it's handy that they have a northern guide, because also some things that are invasive here in southern Ontario might not be invasive up north. So it's good for societies to let their members know what to look for in their area. And there's the northern one, and they have a French one. Next. Other news from the OIPC as of January 1st, 24, they've had a new listing of 10 invasive species to be regulated under the Invasive Species Act. Most of them are aquatic plants, except for Tree of Heaven, which is the other terrestrial plant. And next. Next slide. Okay, thank you. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, and Ministry of Transportation have all come together to work together on a invasive strategic plan on preventing, controlling, and eradicating invasives in Ontario. It was an important step forward. In November of 2023, government, strategic partners, scientists, Indigenous peoples, and conservationists are working together through key actions and tactics to upgrade the plan in the decade since its initial release. So just like Claudette was mentioning, it's important that we have some federal legislation to help regulate things coming in so you could prevent it before it starts to be a bigger problem and more costly problem that you have to eradicate. And next. Next slide, please. Okay. So horticulture is the most significant pathway for the introduction of invasive alien plants. Even well-intentioned gardeners can inadvertently contribute to the spread of invasive plants. Being informed and choosing native plants and non-invasive alternatives can help protect our environment and biodiversity. Regrettably, many nurseries continue to sell invasive plants that are sometimes mislabeled as native species. But when you have a plant that's attractive and grows easily anywhere, it's very attractive for nurseries to sell. So halting the sale of profitable plants, even when known to be invasive, is challenging. The only deterrent is increased public education about which plants are invasive and detrimental to the environment, leading to more conscientious purchasing decisions. As gardeners, we have the power to make a difference. Also ensuring that any of your tools, your footwear are free of soil and plant parts when you're leaving different areas or when you're going into naturalized areas after doing some work in your yard, and just doing the best you can. Like we've said before, we're not trying to shame or blame people. I know I've got invasives in my yard. I've been working on my periwinkle the last 2 weeks. We just do our best. So thank you for making Everyday Earth Day.
Sandra, we have one question. Are they planning an invasive species booklet for Eastern Ontario?
Not that I know of, but I can ask Joyce and she can bring it up as an area of concern.
That would be great. Thank you. Okay, there are no other questions. So at this point, I would like to take this opportunity. I should put my video on, I guess. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our guest speaker, Claudette Sims, for such a wonderful presentation, our Earth Day Committee for taking the time to create this informative evening, our Conservation and Environment Committee for working so hard to bring you the most up-to-date information, and of course to all of you for attending. We hope that you have enjoyed the evening and we look forward to bringing you more interesting events like this one. Have a wonderful evening. Good night, everyone.